Good morning, Dan and Amy. And the last hour, we had a discussion with Kina Collins, and I put these questions to her that were posed by my friend John Wood in a very good op-ed he wrote in the Wall Street Journal. The two questions for Black Americans and all those who stand with Black Americans, as he posited the questions. Do we conserve and build on the progress that has been made by our ancestors in search of Martin Luther King Jr.'s beloved community? Or do we reject an American project for which our own people have sacrificed so much? What's it going to be? And then how's it going to be? We got one perspective from Kina Collins. Let's get another from our friend Charles Love, Assistant Executive Director of Seeking Educational Excellence and a former host of Black and Right on these very airwaves, AM 560. He's a native of Gary, Indiana, who fled to Chicago like so many, but landed in the wrong place, to New York City.
Don't pass judgment on him. Don't tell us why he moved to the Big Apple.
You're supposed to go like southeast or southwest, Charles. What are you doing? Charles Love, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Apparently, I'm going to do a hook around, and I had to see the sights along the way. But
there you go.
It's the progression.
There you
go. But it's funny you referenced the segment before because I don't want to. Yeah, obviously, I don't want to eat up all the time. But I want to set up a debate because I could spend my whole segment taking apart all the false syllogism of her argument. It was madness.
Well, it's something that you see a lot actually, and I don't want to denigrate her, but. You have somebody, somebodies, a lot of people get this right. They're very good at identifying many of the problems, but they just have mostly the wrong answers. And there's just not a lot of consideration given for the problem with the policies we've pursued, all government-centric in nature, is they aren't big enough. That seems to be the refrain, and we know that is a dead end, don't we?
Well, definitely. But the bigger thing is, it's not to denigrate her, but you asked a really good question, and I wished I was screaming at the radio because you asked her, is it politics or is it race? And she thought about it and said both. It's because, it's the way you look at it. I think it should be, is it solutions or do you just want empty rhetoric, right? Because if you were trying to solve the problem, the only way you can solve the problem is to dig deeper to find out why they exist. And they'll find an ugly truth, won't they? They'll find out that it may not necessarily be, everything can't be led to where it exists today based on race. So she was throwing out stuff, right? So
yes,
she was just throughout everything you hear. She said, there's lead in our water, right? And I said, if we took that apart, you figure out why. She's assuming that it's racist, but when the pipes were laid, it had nothing to do with that. There's a lot of things in it, right?
I mean,
so it depends on how they look at it.
Yeah, I mean, again, who's in charge of the governments who are in charge of maintaining the infrastructure? But here's the thing, too, and when somebody's losing the central argument, since that's mostly what happens when people argue with me, there's a leading indicator to understand they're losing, which is they go on tangents, as you say, throwing out everything. But here's the thing that, and especially left of center women do this, all races. They go from a conversation you're having about like macro public policy, wealth and poverty, to talking about abortion. And that's what she did. Mm-hmm. And it's just...
Right, she did throw in that.
And I wanted to get your perspective on that, just because it's like that I fall back on my identity, even as I'm decrying identity politics. And so my identity is, because I've been so hyper-politicized by the culture, is that I'm a woman who... wants to have access to abortion or free abortion, free contraception, so on and so forth. But I mean, part of the discussion is rather ironic. Black Lives Matter except in the womb. Black Lives Matter except at the end of life. Black Lives Matter except in terms of opportunities that provide people the path to being independent and living healthier lives. I guess in all those instances, Black lives don't matter where government is subsidizing death or preventing opportunity that hastens it.
Right. Well, but that's the reason why in my debates with the left, it's never, you do a great job and many others, they all have their angle. Mine is to just give them their argument because it never leads to a logical end. And that way they find out what they're saying makes no sense. So I would say to her, okay, there's an all-out assault on women's reproductive rights. Has nothing to do with what we're talking about. You're changing the subject, but aren't you winning the battles everywhere? So what are you going to have? So at some point they keep saying it's this, like we all talk about how they move the goalposts. So the problem is this. Okay, so we fixed that. Well, the problem is this now. She talked about her siblings. She says, well, we're the first generation born after this. Okay, so why is this still a problem? Why? We said that there were, when they talk about systemic racism, they mean, like you said, it's in the system. So it was in the system. In 1964 and 1965, they removed it from the system. So it takes a while for it to flow through. It wasn't fast enough. 1969, Nixon gave them the Philadelphia Plan, right? So why didn't it solve all the problems then? Now, not only are you legally equal, we're going to give you some affirmative action to make it better. But that didn't help. So then, you say, when's the next year? Give me the next time when you think that the country changed and moved to a more positive end than where you want. It gets there, and then they move the goalpost again. So the problem is multi-layered. It's they change the topic. It's they don't bring all the facts. It's that they just throw out things like she said, look at voter suppression in Georgia. Okay, let's look at it. What happened? You don't know because you're not in Georgia and you didn't study it. You're just throwing out words. Yes. So, it makes it hard for us to actually pin them down.
Well, the other thing, too, is we don't have political power. I want political power. But then when we talk about black politicians and positions of authority, those are just symbolic victories. So they're absolved of responsibility for what they do when they have political power, the black politicians, from the identitarian's perspective.
And you said that Trump has only been president for 3 years. Ronald was only governor for 4 years, right? And she's saying that they're symbolic. Okay, it would be symbolic if it was one guy. But you're forgetting about the fact that before that person was another black elected official. Before that was another one. So you're not talking about 1, 2, 3, 7 years. You're talking about 20 or 30 years. And then she talked about the disparity in the neighborhoods. You tried to tell her that Danny Davis is a congressman of all those areas. And she went to, well, but the aldermen are focusing on there. And again, I give them the argument. Okay, you're right. So Brendan Riley and the Michelle woman you said that are white, I'm assuming, she didn't say white, I'm assuming they're both white, are aldermen of certain areas, of white areas, and they're focusing on their white people. So 2 questions to her would be, well, aren't the black aldermen who run the areas that are under Danny Davis's area that are black focusing on why aren't they focusing on the black residents, and why aren't they bringing things home that they need to? And if they are, I thought we were talking about racial disparity and equality, and we shouldn't be focused on race, but you want your black aldermen to focus on the black neighborhoods and the white aldermen to focus on the white neighborhoods, except it's wrong for the white aldermen to focus on the white neighborhoods.
You wrote in an article called False Prophets in cityjournal.org, and you talked about Black Lives Matter, that they started in 2013 and then became radicalized. Who radicalized them? How was their movement hijacked?
Right. So I wasn't there. So unlike, people who just say, I know for a fact this, but my assumption would be they started giving them the benefit of the doubt. They started from a, good premise. They wanted to help. They had a concern. They needed to raise money, and people were giving them, small amounts of money here and there. And I think somebody, we don't know who the person is, came to them and say, you're asking for $500,000. We can give you $4 million, but we're going to have to meet in the middle, and you're going to have to massage your rhetoric and say some of the things we want. You can still say Black Lives Matter, but can you add, this to it? Because there's no way, and as a black person, I'm not saying Black lives don't matter, of course. And I'm not saying a movement to end police brutality isn't important. I'm saying that Black Lives Matter does not do that, right? They, on their own site, in their own words, let's ignore the defund the police madness, say that we want to destroy the nuclear family. Every black person I know, left, right, or center, knows that one of the biggest problems we have in our community is not enough two-parent households. And they're one of their decrees is to end that. They think it's bad that heterosexual people have a preference. It's just the majority. What do you mean a cisgender preference? So their problem is that they're not talking about black issues. So my argument is Black Lives Matter shouldn't be supported, and you shouldn't give them money because, one, they're not black. You don't know where the money goes. And the things that they're pushing for are detrimental to the country.
Well, look at the co-founders of Black Lives Matter on the site. Women like Alicia Garza, and it's founded by 3 women. Yeah, they're neo-Marxists from the get-go. They weren't influenced. They are neo-Marxists. They were neo-Marxists before they were operating under the Black Lives Matter umbrella. So we shouldn't be surprised that that's the the agenda. And we also shouldn't be surprised because, as you say, they're very explicit about it, which is really helpful. Just believe them when they tell you who they are and what they believe. I don't know why this is so controversial. But in terms of the larger topic beyond a particular group or behind like the trading of slogans, Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, blah, blah, blah. The culture here, what is the opportunity? I mean, the one thing that Kina Collins said at the end of the conversation that I genuinely do take to take heart from is that younger Black people, Black millennials, Republicans and Democrats, and she seemed to sort of indicate that there was more open-mindedness among millennials with respect to party affiliation, and they were going to be presenting themselves for offices in greater numbers in the near term. I hope that's right. I hope that there's a breakaway by younger people from the Democrat Party, and maybe you embrace the Republican label in certain places, and maybe you don't. But just being independent of a system that you say is corrupted, and which, in a large measure, I agree by the two parties, then chart a different course for yourself and for those who you seek to represent.
Oh, that's 100. I mean, she's definitely right about that. And I'll tell you this one slight, I don't know what the current events will change, but silver lining beyond that, it's not just younger people. It's most Black people. I'm finding as I talk to people, like when we, from the time we met and all the times we talked, I said that there is a strong strain of Black people who are fed up with what's going on. They know some of the things that you're saying are true, but they haven't gotten to the point. Like, the point shouldn't be to make more Republicans. That's silly. It has nothing to do with party affiliation, right? The point should be to improve lives and to fix things. And people are slowly starting to see that going the way they're going is not going to do it. There are several groups and several Black people in Chicago that are willing to run for office as independents. They want to challenge every seated Democrat, and some that are willing to run for as Republicans, but there's a disconnect because they don't really meet each other and know where to go, and there's no one reaching out to them. And they're waking up, but there's more of an education gap that needs to happen, right? If people don't know, I call them surface thinkers. A lot of people are surface thinkers, and they need to be deep. So they hear all the talking points, they know all the phrases, they know the way to talk about things. But if you ask them more about that issue, that's all they know. I know that I heard that there was a guy who said this, but they don't know anything. It's the reason why they're taking down. You look at all this stuff that's happening today. Most of it I ignore and some of it I laugh at, but some of it's truly dangerous, right? You want to take Yosemite Sam's gun. I'm like, okay, whatever. But you want to take down a statue of Jefferson, the man who wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal," because you don't like them or because all of a sudden it offends you, but you've been walking past that statue for 35 years. That's a problem. You mentioned Washington earlier today. That is a problem. They're going to change every state and every city that has, Washington and Columbus's name in it, and Jackson. Come on. But they don't know. All they know is the bad. It's the way they look at America. That's our biggest problem, is they only look at the bad.
It seems to me that they look at the bad, yes, and then they absolve the government-centric policies from any responsibility for at least some of the bad. The welfare state policies that have incentivized the disintegration of the family across the racial spectrum, but most notably in the Black community. And so I wonder how you react to people like Willie Wilson in Chicago pushing a reparations proposal, people like Bob Johnson, the billionaire former founder of BET Network, at the national level, pushing a $14 trillion reparations proposal at the federal level. Is that a productive conversation? Is that a conversation that has to happen, whether you think it's productive or not? Or is it something that you see as marginal and should be largely ignored?
Oh, don't ignore it. I love it. I definitely think it's a conversation that should happen, because the only way we get surface thinkers to learn more and get it out in the open is for everybody to hear the whole conversation. But it can't be just, yes, things are bad and people kowtow like we're seeing now, washing feet. It needs to be, okay, what do you want to do and how is it going to help? What are the reactions? How are you going to do it? Like Bob Johnson, for instance, agree or disagree with the $14 trillion. My problem is we all say we want equality. So it's like being attacked by getting hit in a car accident and the insurance is paying the people out, right? And I'm the victim. They don't judge me based on how much money I make or where I work. I'm the victim. So Bob Johnson's proposal says that he wants to pay, I don't know, $300-something thousand per person, but it's based on your income or what you do. Why? If you're saying that we're all descendants of slaves and we've been so aggrieved that we're owed this money, then I'm owed the money, right? So that's what I love it, because it makes you pull the argument out, right? So I'm owed the money.
That's a great point.
Exactly. And then another one is, okay, you want to give it to slavery. I say, okay, you want to help people. Let's be honest. No slaves are direct descendants. Very maybe one, maybe not. There's nobody left, right? There's nobody left. So what you do is you say, all right, we're going to give money to people who are directly affected by Jim Crow. You have to be a certain age. We're going to cut it off its limit. So that limits the number of people. It limits the amount, and then it dies. And then after that, everything else is gone. So it's got to be a trade-off on the other side. So I give you this, then you can't have affirmative action. You can't have this. You can't have this, right? So there's got to be two sides to the conversation. The problem with the reparations conversation is most of it's one-sided, and when somebody on the other side makes a comment, the white people won't touch it, and the blacks are like, oh, you just don't care about black people and you're Uncle Tom. So let's have the conversation.
All right, Charles Love, be careful out in New York City, because that may be the only city with more white champagne socialists charging you, trying to shine your shoes than Wilmette. So just.
But I can't leave the house yet, so I'm okay.
Oh, there you go.
That's
You're
right.
quarantined. Charles Love, Assistant Executive Director of Seeking Educational Excellence, former host of Black and Right on our airwaves here in Chicago, native of Gary, now writes from NYC. Charles, pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. An